Hey all, happy Independence Day week. Just a quick reminder that you have tomorrow off from classes, so I hope that you take advantage of that time off, spend a little time with your family or whatever you like to do on an off day. I just wanted to send a quick video on our discussion of moral norms. You all watched the film Weapons of the Spirit, and I just love that film. Like I said in the announcement, that every time that I see the film, something new pops up to me. And as I was reading your discussions, I think you all were kind of right on line, that you noticed especially the particular immediate judgment. That is when the community members were asked why they participated in the rescue of the Jews. They said, that's a silly question, or of course we did it. Why would anybody not do something like that? That's a particular immediate judgment. It just is a snap judgment, and you are, reasons could be accessed, but they don't want to give reasons. They don't think that they had reasons that they were utilizing when they made those decisions. It was just coming as a decision. And so that's one of the key principles. And then you all talked about each of, especially the four basic ones in Kingdom Ethics, the chapter that you read, basic convictions, that is, who the character of God is, what the nature of humanity is, and how those play a factor in our moral decisions. You talked about principles, the value of human life, those kinds of things. And you talked about some rules like the 10 commandments that are utilized in there, loving your neighbor as yourself, those kinds of rules that they were accessing when they were doing it. It's interesting as you watch the film, maybe a couple more times, is that there are just layers. That's why I love this film. They're just layers of moral norms present in there, which is usually true in many of our moral decisions. We'll say that this is a motivating factor, but then there's also layers underneath that are motivating factors. And so you see that with the villagers, that was very apparent. It was their immediate judgment. It was the pastors preaching a particular message about peacemaking in there. It was the community making the decisions together, even though they would say that they made them individually. It was their shared history as Huguenots that was passed down throughout generations. That was probably 300-400 years before this happened, and so that was passed down through generations of people, and they remember the story and could empathize with the Jewish community there because of the suffering and persecution that their ancestors went through at the hands of the Catholics in the 30 Years' War. And so yeah, you all picked up on that. I think the two that I talked about in the lecture, that Stassen and Gushy and don't mention, they have a little something about it, but it's not much. But Richard Hayes develops it more fully, and it's actually a really important part of our moral formation and our moral development. And it's the main way that most people develop in their morality and their ethical formation, is through paradigms. That's again through stories that are passed down, where moral lessons are taught. And again, Jesus uses paradigms frequently in the pages of the gospel. The one main paradigm that these villagers carried with them was their story of their ancestors, the Huguenots. And so that's a really important moral norm. What stories are forming us? And what's the moral lesson in those stories? And especially as you talk to somebody who comes from a different tradition than you, a different background, a different place, that's a really important aspect when you come into conflict to look at and to talk about what are the stories that are forming us. And then the second one are the symbols that are used, right? They talked a little bit about the Old Testament, right? That's a symbol of the Jewish community. They're a symbol of the people of God. And so the other symbol that's utilized is they reference the Good Samaritan. That's the story that gets told over and over, but now it's told so many times that we know the story, so all you have to say is a Good Samaritan, and the moral lessons come out. So it's really important to see those ones as well as you look at it. So there's 6 moral norms: the particular immediate judgments, rules, principles, basic convictions, paradigms, and symbols. Why this is important for peacemaking and for conflict resolution is because when you get into conflicting morals, and sometimes it doesn't seem like you have the shared language or the shared assumptions to resolve a conflict, it may be that on a rules level you don't have the same you don't have those same shared opinions or judgments, but on a principles level you might, or on a basic convictions level you might, and so you might work out from there. Again, the stories that are told, the stories that are carried in a particular tradition are really important to understand and to enter into as you want to seek to make peace or seek to resolve some conflict or create some kind of shalom or wholeness in a situation. And so it's really important to be able to know these, and then also to be able to know them in such a way that when you have a conversation, that in that conversation you're like, oh, okay, we don't agree on a particular rule, but is there a principle behind that rule that we can draw on that might move us in the conversation? Or is there just something that I need to enter into one of their stories in such a way that they think that and know that I understand them and understand where they're coming from? So it's actually a really important part of the peacemaking process, is to be able to see where somebody is, where the moral conflict is, and what's kind of moving that conflict forward, and then entering into that at one of these places. And it may be that you get to a fundamental difference in your basic conviction about who God is, or what human nature is. And that's okay, but if you get to that level, then you can begin to have conversations there, right? And you may say, well, we have conflict here, and so that's what's creating the conflict, but we probably can move in some of these other areas because now we've recognized that we have a different perspective on God, or a different perspective on human nature, those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's really all I want to say about the content of Moral Norms and the film. A couple things that I want to say just as an aside, for those of you that are doing training, both in ministerial training, whether you're training to be a pastor or take up some kind of vocational ministry, or you're just doing your education for a leadership in the church, some kind of lay leadership in the church. A couple of things that stood out to me was the pastors in the village were a minority of 2. I love that saying, in that they stood against the Nazis but didn't want to fight them in the beginning, and they were a minority. And then when France surrendered to them, they didn't want to cooperate. So again, it put them in the minority. And they talked about the power of the minority of 2. The second thing that I wanted to say is I love the phrase, the conspiracy of goodness. It's a theme throughout the scripture that you really can't argue with good. And this is a good that everybody recognizes. It's a good that people affirm. And if they don't affirm, it makes them look funny or like a fool. That's where the Bible kind of talks about, keep on doing good and you will heap burning coals on their head. You will make them look foolish, or they will make themselves look foolish if they protest the good. And you just see this in this film specifically, is a conspiracy of goodness. And as we do move into peacemaking, as we move into acts of love and acts of justice, this should be our posture as a church, is we're participating in this conspiracy of goodness. And then finally, the third thing that I want to say is there are no small callings. There's a lot of emphasis right now on cities and church planting and all this kind of thing, especially in the American church context, American evangelical church context. But there's also, you see that these 2 pastors were in a metropolitan area when they were preaching pacifism, and they got moved to this small kind of village that didn't have a lot of influence in its day. But we're still reading about those pastors today. So wherever God has called you, whatever God has planted, whatever situation God has planted you in, that's the place where we need to be faithful. And who knows what God will do with our faithfulness there. But that's what we're called to, is to be faithful where God has placed us. So there are really no small callings. There's just a calling that God has put on your life, and you don't know what kind of impact that you will have as you seek to faithfully fulfill that calling. Okay, I hope you all have a great week. For those of you that celebrate the 4th of July, I hope that you have a great celebration with all your family and friends. And we'll talk at the end of the week about some of the content for class and then your upcoming essay.